Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. The time is just after 1, so thank you very much again, like I said, to everyone who's joined us. My name is Simon Thowell. I'm the Director of the School of Sustainable Food and Farming, based here at Harper Adams University. I'd like to introduce and welcome our speaker today, Professor Michael Lee, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at Harper Adams, and also to thank one of our delivery partners, Trinity Global Farm Pioneers, for offering to host today's webinar on their Global Farm Pioneers platform. So for those of you that might not be familiar, very brief introduction. The School of Sustainable Food and Farming is an academic and a commercial collaboration between Harper Adams University, Morrison's Supermarkets, McDonald's UK and Ireland, and the National Farmers Union. And we were started and created with a shared vision, which was to try and educate and inspire farmers to achieve net zero, but within very much a sustainable farming and food system. So this is our third webinar organised by the school. We will be hosting further webinars and training in the months ahead. So we do hope that you are able to access the School of Sustainable Food and Farming website and to check out some of our events that might be happening in the future. As part of this session, we do have the facility for question and answers. So we'd really like to hear from you. If during Michael's presentation, you've got a question that you'd like to ask, please do pop that into the comments box, the questions box, and we will come back to those once Michael has completed his presentation. Just to say as well that the session today will be recorded and will be available on the school's website for any of those that you would like to view again, or for any colleagues that you think might be interested in viewing it. The Q&A part of the session, I must say, will not be recorded, so it will be just the actual presentation. So I'd like to, without any further ado, introduce you to today's speaker, Michael Lee. As I mentioned, Michael is Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Harper Adams University and is a renowned expert in sustainable livestock systems. In 2019, he was elected President of the European Federation of Animal Science, Livestock Farming Systems Commission, and has been President of the British Society of Animal Science. He represents the UK on Animal Task Force, a public-private think tank informing the UK Parliament and EU Parliament in Brussels, and is co-chair of the UK Universities Network on Climate Change, Net Zero Group. Michael today will give his presentation, which is entitled The Role of Livestock in Sustainable Agri-Food. Are the metrics correct? So, Michael, it's over to you. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about something which is very, very close to my heart, and also the research that we're doing here at Harper Adams and wider engagement within the School of Sustainable Food and Farming. I'm sure we're all aware that sustainability is extremely complex, and scientists like to try and simplify complexity by producing simple metrics, which will then help policy to make decisions on how to make and inform the correct interventions moving forward. But by simplifying metrics, often we can lose aspects of why the system is so complex and looking at impacts and trade-offs. So if the science is changing, and particularly the sector is changing, certainly the metrics need to change. So anyone who has heard me speak before will hopefully be very much aware of Rockstrom's planetary boundaries. And if you're not, then please do look up this fantastic piece of work in Science. I put the years that they were published on the screen. What Rockstrom did was to define the planet as any biological system in terms of homeostatic control. In any biological systems, you know, yourself, a microbe, a cow, if you apply a perturbation, a disease, a pressure, its natural biological process is to kick back against that and return to a homeostatic position. In a way, it's a bit like an elastic band. If you pull an elastic band, if you let go, it will bounce back into its original position. But if you stretch that elastic band too far, the elastic band loses its elasticity and its ability to return to a homeostatic position. And really, that's what Rockstrom was referring to in his planetary boundaries. The fact that the planet has ability to heal itself. But once you've exceeded those planetary boundaries, it will never return to its original position. Humans have been awful to this planet. The anthropogenic impact on this planet has exceeded Earth's planetary boundaries and ability to heal itself. So let's be clear. And everything I'm going to say when I'm challenging metrics which are being used currently to look at livestock, I am not saying that business as usual can continue. We have to change. We have to change in what we consume. We have to change in how we produce our food. And we certainly have to change in how we're using fossil fuels. We have to protect the environment, and we need to be at one with the planet as we're moving towards a plateauing of 10 to 11 billion people on this planet. We have to define how we're going to coexist with nature and produce high quality, nutritious food that's going to deliver human health. So what Rockstrom showed is that the Earth, through human intervention, has exceeded its planetary boundaries in terms of the nitrogen cycle, actually also in terms of the phosphorus cycle. This is the 2009 data, the 2014 data showed phosphorus had exceeded its planetary boundaries, biodiversity loss, and of course, climate change, which we're very much aware of. And really, for the most of this presentation, I'm going to be talking about aspects of climate change, and particularly the metrics used to define climate change in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. So let's focus in on climate change and greenhouse gases. And I think it's really important to contextualize it. And this is a really good data set. So our world in data, and every couple of years, they pull together the impact of key sectors associated with greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this really clearly articulates here the major challenge we have, particularly associated with fossil fuels. And the energy sector, and you can break it down to different components of what sectors use energy, still equates for about 73.2% of all global greenhouse gases. And then we've got other industries, waste, and then we have agriculture and forestry, which makes up a good proportion at 18.4%. Then we look and break down agriculture and forestry, and we can see that livestock and manures equate for 5.8% of that environmental impact associated with greenhouse gases. But there seems to be a narrative which is skewing the debate around the impact of livestock and climate change. There's an awful lot of information that seems that there's a silver bullet approach that if we remove livestock, we're halfway there in terms of achieving climate balance and equity. Clearly, this data shows that livestock, if you want to consider, is a band-aid. It's not the cure. Removing fossil fuels is the cure to climate change. There seems to be a narrative shift in terms of focusing in purely on livestock and dietary interventions to produce a golden solution of a more stable climate environment and achieving the 1.5 degrees. I'm not saying for 1 second that the livestock sector doesn't need to change and doesn't need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and methane. Yes, it certainly does. But as I said, it's a band-aid. We need to also focus in on the cure, which is reduction in fossil fuels. So why has there been this skewing in the literature and in the press about purely the role of livestock in terms of climate change? I've got to say as well, the energy sector is getting cleaner. It is decarbonising. And this role of agriculture, forestry and livestock will only get bigger as the other sectors decarbonise. So it's really important that we do concentrate on livestock, but we must realise that we have to concentrate on carbon dioxide associated with fossil fuels as the cure. So a major reason why there's been this narrative and this demonization of livestock when it comes to climate change and greenhouse gases, I believe is firmly associated with this metric: carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product. Again, anyone who's heard me speak has seen me talk around this slide before. And what this does, it summarizes scientists like me's approach to simplify a very complex aspect of greenhouse gases impact within the food chain. And what it's done is had a look at the proportion of carbon dioxide equivalents, collating a whole array of greenhouse gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide, we equate them to a carbon dioxide equivalent, and then allocate it to the amount that's released when producing a kilogram of that product. And by doing that, you'll see there's a clear focus in the environmental impact of ruminant livestock, as opposed to monogastric livestock, and particularly plant-based proteins. And this has been a really focus on a realization of why we should reduce ruminant livestock within a sustainable food system. Is that fair? Well, first of all, I just want to pick up the first mistake in doing that is the use of global averages. To produce a global average for the environmental impact of beef of between 50 and 60 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product, it really does not show where that livestock product is produced that you have in your fridge at home, or you'll produce and sell and purchase at a retail within the UK. So we need to look at where these products are produced, how they're produced, and also understand the regions and the types of production systems that can reduce these greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore select and favour production practices which will drive down these emissions. So remove the narrative from removal to refinement, reflection, reduction, and selection in areas which produce these products at lower environmental impact. So this data is from the CL report, an excellent report looking at UK livestock's emissions, and this summarises the emissions from sheep between 10.85 to 17.86 based on the different production systems, and UK beef. And you can see that they are very different. So if I just go back to this global average data, which was published in 2014 and is still used an awful lot in the literature. Also, we have to understand the changing face in consumption. To blame environmental impact and human health on particularly red meat and livestock products actually goes against face about the patterns we're seeing within the retail and consumption market. If you have a look at actually the consumption of lamb, it's been declining since the 1950s. And what's been replacing it is poultry meat. But we're still hearing about the detrimental effect of red meat on human health and environmental impact, even though we've been consuming less of this product. So there's got to be some sort of balance. So the first message is we've got to understand where our food is produced and use metrics associated with its production and how to support production in places which have a lower environmental impact. So we need to look at where it's most appropriate to produce food and different types of food. And livestock are important to the UK, and particularly ruminant livestock. The UK is 60 to 70% self-sufficient in meat, milk and eggs. It produces farm gate products worth about £12 billion. And most critically, the UK's rural community and rural economy is grassland-based, with 70% of agriculture being grassland-based within the UK. So we need to have a look at how we support those sectors to reduce those emissions and value those products as part of a sustainable food system. The other key thing to reflect on and make sure that scientists don't just use a single metric that was developed 10, 15 years ago, is to say that the farming community is not static. It is changing. It is improving. And the sector is moving towards net zero and looking at how it can reduce those emissions, and certainly can achieve the COP26 target of a 30% reduction in methane from the livestock sector, which I'll show in a moment why that's so important. So all farms and supply chains are looking at how they can reduce their carbon footprint and improve efficiency. And I'd like to think of it as 4 steps in this. First of all, focusing in on the animal, genetics and health, how you can select animals to be more efficient and suitable to your system. So selecting animals which have higher performance will significantly reduce their environmental footprint. The second step is on inputs. So if we're looking at livestock, it's on diet, on nutrition, and significantly improving the quality of that nutrition will significantly reduce their environmental footprint. And then on top of that, we have the potential of supplements. But first of all, must be basic nutrition. Thirdly, land, how we use that land. As I said within the slide, when we looked at energy and we looked at agriculture, energy has the potential to decarbonize, moving away from fossil fuels. Of course, agriculture doesn't have the same opportunity to decarbonize because food is carbon to feed carbon, which is us. So we're always going to have a release of emissions, a release of carbon dioxide, a release of methane. But what agriculture does have is the land capacity to capture some of that carbon dioxide and those emissions. And that's critical to that net zero. So land, how land is used, NPP, hedgerows, trees, soil health is critical as part of that journey. And then finally, looking at every aspect of the farm and how we can reduce energy use and produce green energy. Give an example here of solar panels, but there's a lot of interest, of course, in the valorization of manures and slurries, in producing green energy, in liquefying methane, and how that could be used within the energy sector. Really, really exciting opportunities, which agriculture is moving on. It is not static. I just wanted to give an example of some work that we did on land to show how a focused look about the opportunities on a farm could realize a pathway to net zero. So this is some work that a good friend and colleague of mine at Rothamsted, Taro Takahashi, and I did modeling a farm in Devon, looking at a small farm, 20 hectares, 1.5 livestock units per hectare, 30 finishing cattle, suckler cattle, finishing about 60 kilograms of live weight, each producing about 15 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per animal. How many trees on this farm would we have to plant to offset that methane? So we did this mapping and looked here at the top line, the baseline with no woodland, and you can see the live weight on the x-axis and the carbon dioxide on the y-axis. And then by converting so much of the land into woodland, you could reduce your carbon footprint, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, you get to carbon net zero, 50% you're actually taking carbon out of the system. But any farmer listening to this would say, well, that's great, but you put me out of business because I'm not producing product anymore. So how do we combine, how do we find that sweet spot? So Taro also then modeled in current productivity. And if you had a focus on improving productivity on your farm, you could hit a sweet spot. So in this analysis, you could improve productivity improvement of 20% on your farm with a woodland cover of 20%, would result in a 70% reduction in greenhouse gas and retain 96% productivity. So it's this level of detail of understanding and modeling is what we need to do to support farms to make the right choice around those 4 areas. So getting back to metrics, and I'm sure you're all aware of the work of Professor Miles Allen at Oxford on GWP star. And I truly believe the IPCC is changing on their view of between GWP 100 and GWP star, because it's really important to understand why we are measuring these gases. Are we measuring these gases just for a number, for a scientific paper? Or are we measuring these gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, to understand warming and potential and what's happening in the environment? And I think everyone would agree it's very much the latter. So therefore, adopting a system which better recognizes the difference between these gases and how they influence warming is the critical component. And in this example here, which again, Michelle Kane, Miles Allen, will produce these slides, it's having a look at how in different scenarios using a GWP 100 approach or GWP star, actually in terms of the warming of the planet, how interventions which reduce emissions will have an impact. So if we have a rising level of methane, then obviously it doesn't matter if we use GWP star, GWP 100, we're in trouble, guys. Stop increasing our emissions. We need to reduce. So it doesn't matter if you use GWP star or GWP 100, if you're increasing, it's both a pathway to disaster. What about stable or a 10% reduction? Well, this, because of the way methane turns over in the atmosphere, shows if you use GWP star, it's shown actually you're causing a slight cooling effect because you're reducing the methane that was in the atmosphere previously has been removed and gets turned over. So there's no increase in terms of heating. But actually targeting this 30% or 35% reduction, which is the challenge set out at COP26, could have a huge impact on the environment in terms of methane. And certainly that's where the live sector is going. So this cooling effect in terms of the reduction. So we need to use these metrics to better understand the impact on the planet, not just as a metric to be able to simplify the complexity around carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. So that's one part of the metric. The other part of the metric, and anyone who knows me knows that this is really where a lot of my passion lies in terms of the value of livestock products in terms of human nutrition, why they are part of an Eat Well guide, and why we've evolved to be omnivorous in terms of our dietary selection. So why, you ask any human nutritionist why a livestock product is on an Eat Well guide, and it's there for some key nutrients, which are more available in livestock products than in plant-based foods. And they are essential amino acids and readily available protein in terms of a DS score, and I'll come on to DS in a moment. A selection of monounsaturated fatty acids, some long-chain omega-3, EPA, DHA, a whole array of different minerals, including calcium, iron, zinc, and a whole array of different vitamins, particularly the B vitamins, riboflavin, folic acid, and vitamin B12. There is no doubt that these key nutrients are easier to extract from the food in terms of part of our digestive system from animal-based foods as opposed to plant-based foods. So that's clearly why these livestock products are part of an Eat Well guide. And what we did in this analysis was to have a look at how much, so these are recommended daily intakes of these key nutrients. I don't know if you can see my cursor, that the RDI associated with these key nutrients. And this is the amount of 100 grams of these different livestock products. These are different meats produced in different ways from the UK. How much of these key nutrients they provide. And what we've done here in the histogram below is replace change the metric from carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product to carbon dioxide equivalents for the provision of 1% of RDI, the recommended daily intake of these key nutrients. And when you do that, you shift massively the environmental burden associated with the food, because the food is there to provide key nutrients, not weight. So why are we comparing food just by weight, kilograms of product? I'm sure everyone agrees a kilogram of carrots provides a very different nutrient profile to a kilogram of beef. So therefore, we need to relate the nutrients they contain with their environmental component. And of course, livestock do have a higher environmental burden in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents they emit, but they have a very different nutrient profile. And that's how we need to reflect it. I just wanted to flag up a couple of papers, one from my group when I was at Rothamsted Research, and another one, a great paper from Paul Mohan, who's in Massey University in New Zealand. And this was taking this methodology a little bit further. So in our first paper, we looked at the nutritional value of suckler beef from different pasture-based systems and trying to include not just the amino acids, but the other key nutrients, particularly B vitamins, minerals, etc., and trying to define a metric which accounts for that. And we showed that 100 grams of beef would equate for 18.6% of the RDI of the key nutrients. And when you were reflecting on the amount of beef or animal-based products that you consume, you should be relating it to the nutrients that they contain. What Paul Mohan did was to have a look at protein quality and said, actually, if you're relating the environmental footprint of a product by protein, which was done in the paper by Paul Nemeczek, actually you need to correct that protein for its bioavailability. So the digestible, indispensable amino acid score, the DS score. So it reflects how many are essential amino acids and their bioavailability, how well they're absorbed. And recently we produced another paper led by Graham McAuliffe, who's based at Rothamsted, on using DAS particularly as a functional unit in life cycle assessment. So trying to switch life cycle assessment away from carbon dioxide equivalents per kilogram of product to a better understanding, first and foremost, of GWP star, but then most critically, looking at nutrient density. If we're doing this, clearly we have to reflect on consumption levels. Eating responsibly is a key component towards sustainability. Eating responsibly, the level of livestock products, which is good for our health, can be part of a sustainable food system. Over-consuming, you may as well forget all this metrics, because this metrics is all about the key nutrients which drive human health. Overconsumption negates all that. So please remember that when we're looking at defining these metrics. Also, I really like this paper. This was introduced to me recently at a meeting in Brussels. And congratulations to the authors. Jonathan Barnsley is the lead author. What this paper did, it looked at the modeling impact of diet. And what they did, they modeled the transition from an omnivorous diet to a vegan diet at the age of 25. And they chose 25 for a couple of key reasons. First of all, it's advised not to remove livestock products or animal source foods prior to adolescence because of the key nutrients they contain. So it's really important for human health and development that children, particularly infants, are fed milk, dairy, and livestock products to ensure that they get all the key nutrients they need. Also at 25, you often have a choice. You make a choice about what you want to be and who you want to be and your impact on this planet. And that's often when people choose to become vegan for whatever reason, And so in this analysis, they showed that a vegan diet resulted, and it did result in a 2 to 4% lifetime reduction using carbon dioxide so warming equivalents, which is GWP star, compared to an omnivorous diet, critically on an energy equivalence. So 2 to 4% reduction. So not a huge amount, but there was still a reduction on an energy equivalence. However, when you equated those diets on a protein quality equivalence, there's negligible difference. There's no statistical difference. So if you equated the value of the protein in replacing the and the balancing it between an omnivorous and herbivorous or a vegan diet, actually there was no difference if you equated that difference in the quality of protein. And that's really important because you eat livestock products for protein, not energy. You never hear a marathon runner saying, quickly, I need to have a lamb chop because I'm going to go and run the marathon. You'd have an energy bar because you need that energy. You need that relevant energy. So we need to define why livestock products are there, and they're for protein, not energy. An awful lot of the analysis is done on energy equivalents, so we need to rebalance that. Also, within this paper, it said that the vegan diet required supplementation throughout the lifetime, supplementation for B12, etc. And that wasn't included in that 2 to 4%. So we just need to take that into account. So I think this was a really good balanced study. One thing these studies and previous studies haven't accounted for as well is actually the interconnectivity of the protein source and the Eat Well guide. If you look at any Eat Well guide in the world, it can be split, the plate can be split into 3 components, roughly. A protein component, an energy component, which is carbohydrate, and then a fruit and vegetables, which is to provide a whole array of different vitamins, be they lipid or water-soluble vitamins and minerals, but critically fiber. So that's why if you have a look at Eat Well guide, it can be split into 3. Energy component, protein component, fiber, water-soluble and lipid-soluble vitamins and minerals. So predominantly plant-based plates, of course. We all eat plant-based diets, which are supplemented with animal source foods. So what we did was to have a look at making different plates. If you imagine in a canteen, you had a choice of different food choices you could have. You could choose one of three proteins: beef, pork, or tofu. You could choose one carbohydrate, either potatoes, bread, or rice. You could choose one fiber source, either carrots, tomatoes, or cucumbers, and always with apples. So then we produced all these different plates. And I have to say that great respect for, again, Taro Takahashi for number crunching this data and driving this analysis when I was at Rothamsted. And what we did, we looked at uncapped and capped nutrients. So the percentage that these different protein sources provided from that guide in terms of the key nutrients. So uncapped is as soon as you hit, capped is as soon as you hit your requirement for vitamin B12 on the plate, you don't get any other more value for it. So you can't say I've hit 120% of my vitamin B12 and therefore get a benefit of that. So it's a capped. Uncapped just shows the key percentage of those nutrients that are on the plate, even if you've exceeded your requirements for them. So you can see here that beef performs and pork perform better than tofu for uncapped, but also in terms of capped, there's a bigger difference. And that's because tofu is a plant-based protein, so therefore it's more similar to the other plants on the plate, be it the carbohydrate source or the fiber sources. So therefore, the extra value you have from having a plant-based protein on your plate is lower in terms of the other nutrients you need for a healthy diet. Whereas because livestock protein is so much different, it provides more of the different nutrients than there is in the other 2/3 of the plate coming from the carbohydrate or from the leafy vegetables. And then if you relate that to nutrient density per carbon dioxide equivalent, you can see the difference in terms of the environmental burden shifts down dramatically. And then what we've done is further extrapolate that in terms of what we see in the data I first showed you, where beef had a significantly higher carbon burden to a plant-based protein, 15 times that of tofu. Whereas if you take into account the nutrient density, it's at 2.2. And when you equate for DAS and bioavailability, it's at 1.7. So you can see then the environmental burden comes down, and therefore you can see actually may have a position as part of a sustainable diet, particularly if we can produce in parts of the planet whose agriculture is set up for the production of that protein. And that's what I want to come on to now, is to make sure that we also consider the wider and other aspects of sustainability metrics when we're considering climate change. Because if we just look at carbon, we'll get a very skewed system. We have to reduce our carbon footprint, but we mustn't do it in isolation. We must consider other metrics of sustainability when we are making our decisions about what we consume and how we support our agriculture moving forward. I'm sure you're all aware of the 3 pillars of sustainability. Anything sustainable has to be societal, sustainably, economic, and environmentally. Farms aren't making money, then they are going out of business. If farms aren't producing high quality, nutritious food that drives health, when we're not delivering societal need, and of course, if we are damaging the environment, we are affecting future generations' ability to feed themselves. So all these things need to be considered, not just carbon. Central to this, and particularly central to agriculture, I'm sure you'll agree, is soil health. And again, a big thank you to Professor Neal from Rothamsted Research, who drove an awful lot of this analysis using the long-term experiments at Rothamsted. And this, I won't go into detail because I simply haven't got the time, unfortunately. But what these cartoons and this data shows you is that soil health is driven by chemical, biological, and physical processes. What drives each of those to move in the correct direction is organic matter in the soil. It helps the physics to allow water and oxygen to move through the soil, which helps the microbial and the biological components to be able to convert nutrient inputs into biomass. Think of soil as a lung, The more connected the porosities, the better the alveoli, the greater the flow of the oxygen, and therefore the better the soil will use nutrient inputs to produce biomass. What drives organic matter into soils is manures, slurries, shit. There was a clear understanding that a fantastic way of delivering organic matter back to degraded soils is through the incorporation of livestock within that system. And the application and the movement and the transfer of our brown gold in the west of the country to the east of the country, where the soils are degraded in algal systems. And this was some work driven by Professor Steve McGrath in our Soils and Nutrition project, again, when I was at Rothamsted, which looked at degraded soils in the UK. So, and what that showed is that 40% of our arable soils are degraded, i.e. they can hold more organic matter, which will drive production. And that's not to say that degraded soils can't produce high quality food. Of course they can, but they need more input. They need more nitrogen input. They need more fertilizers. Whereas if we can improve the health of the soil, we can get more from less. We can produce higher yields with less input. And that's really why it's important to return organic matter to soils. Excuse me. This paper from Poulton summarized over 170 years worth of data from Rothamsted in terms of how you can return organic matter to soils. Some fantastic outputs from that research. Another really vital metric to consider when we think about the role that livestock will have in sustainable food systems is arable land use. So I think it's clear now that the human population will plateau around about 10 to 11 billion people. So the first time in human existence on the planet, we will know how much food we need to produce going forward to feed that population. Because up to this point, really, it's been guessing when and where are we going to plateau. So now we know the agricultural land that we have, and we know that we need to protect our biodiversity. We need to stop encroachment on the Amazon, the steppes, the Pampinas, and all this fantastic, rich, biodiverse life we have on our planet. But at the same time as protecting this, we need to healthily feed our human population. So therefore, that means using the best land to produce crops and plants to feed humans, not livestock. Livestock need to be part of a sustainable circular food system that utilize land not suitable for growing crops and utilize byproducts and waste streams or valorized streams from the food industry. That is the pathway to sustainable livestock systems, and it's the critical role of livestock, and it's why we should consider an omnivorous diet as part of a sustainable pathway to realizing our solutions in terms of climate change, and also how we're going to support 10 to 11 billion people on the planet. And this is this analysis just looking at arable land use. This is some work that Mike Wilkinson and I did a few years ago for BSAS, which is looking at arable land use, meter squares, for the provision of key RDI nutrients. And you then can see that actually that our ruminant livestock are more sustainable under this particular metric, because they use more of the byproducts and less arable land. And that's going to be a key component when we think about how we feed a growing population. And that can be summarized very simply in this hockey shaped graph. If you look at the grams of livestock, the grams of protein that an average human needs, about 60 grams per day, and you can say, well, these could come all from livestock, or they could come all from plants. But what is the most sustainable? Well, the most sustainable is something which drives the most efficient use of land, which is driven by this metric, this arable land requirement. And you can see the optimum land use for human nutrition lies here. So around about 20 to 30 grams of that protein coming from livestock, an omnivorous diet. and that's critical. So I know time is running out, and Simon wanted me to leave some time for questions, so I will try and wrap up. Just to emphasize in this slide, and again, anyone who's heard me speak, I use this slide way too much because I love it, but it's really important that I end any talk when we're considering livestock, and we've talked about climate change, and we've talked about nutrition, and we've talked about land use efficiency, that we remember the other aspects that livestock delivers to society, whether it's in terms of aesthetics and biodiversity. Yes, the balance needs to be right. There'll be parts of the planet that would do without livestock, but there are parts of the planet that critically need livestock to drive biodiversity. In many parts of the world, they are a fantastic form of traction, where they don't rely on diesel and petrol chemicals to till their land. We must also remember the fact that livestock products are a great source of renewable fibers. We need to rediscover wool and move away from plastics. And of course, livestock products are in a whole array of different food ingredients, and so they should be, because a valorized product from an animal carcass can actually be more sustainable than a product that replaces it, that uses arable land to grow it. Just look at palm oil. When we moved animal fats from a whole array of products, we replaced it with palm oil and probably set the orangutan on its pathway to extinction because of land use, when we had an alternative, which was a byproduct from the livestock sector. We've talked about soil health, and we've talked about the vital role that livestock play in sub-Saharan Africa and subsistence farms. The picture of the goats here, the farmer refers to these animals as their bio-ATM. These animals provide fantastic resilience, critical resilience to these farmers. Gabola, a scientist out of Florida, recently published a paper showing the importance of livestock in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of driving and moving out of poverty, particularly in terms of human nutrition, health, and brain development. So, Simon, I'm sorry I've probably overrun. Just to conclude, livestock are part of the solution for sustainable global food security, but great care must be given in developing metrics when determining their role. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for that. A very interesting presentation. I think the link between livestock production and nutrition is absolutely vital. It's been fascinating to listen to your thoughts on that.